Hi, I'm Thomas Phelps, Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Chief Information Officer for Laserfiche. Welcome back to Empower 2021. Today, you will hear from Ted Ross, General Manager and CIO of the IT agency for the City of Los Angeles, and Nicol Turner Lee, Senior Fellow of Governance Studies and the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation with the Brookings Institution. And now, let's invite Ted to join us to share his ideas about building a smarter city and how you can apply these same concepts to your organization.
Hi, my name is Ted Ross, and I'm Chief Information Officer for the City of Los Angeles, serving under Mayor Eric Garcetti. And when you think of the City of Los Angeles, I want to welcome you to the home of Hollywood, California. And when you think of Hollywood, you think of things like an Emmy Award. And so this is a real Emmy Award that I wanted to show it to you. You know it's real because at the very bottom, it has all of the legal disclaimers. And I'll explain to you in a few minutes how I, as a Chief Information Officer at the City of LA, came into possession of this great award. But today I want to talk a little more about building a smarter Los Angeles. And that's really what the conversation is. Most of you know the City of Los Angeles from many different angles. But let me explain a little bit regarding some of the scope of responsibility that I have and how digital services like Laserfiche have been transformational at the City of LA. First of all, LA is the second largest city in the United States. It has over 4 million residents, over 500,000 businesses that call Los Angeles home, and pre-COVID, we had over 48 million annual visitors. So it shows that we have a lot of people who live here, a lot of businesses that operate here, and a lot of people who visit and come through in a transitory nature. What you may have not known also is that the City of Los Angeles has quite a few achievements, especially in the area of technology. So for example, we won the #1 digital city in the US award for 3 straight years. And it's for some of the ambitious and some of the innovative projects that we've been able to implement. And when we think about what a scale of a city like this is, here's a few images that might be able to provide some insight. First of all, we have over 22,000 miles of road that we call a part of the City of Los Angeles. So as you can imagine, there's a huge physical infrastructure involved. We're responsible for maintaining over 6,000 miles of sewers. So this is almost an underground world entirely under the City of LA that certainly the vast majority of people aren't even aware exists, but also a part of the huge expanse and the huge scope of what we have to support the City of Los Angeles. And one statistic that continues to always amaze me has to do with the Port of Los Angeles. The Port of Los Angeles, believe it or not, is responsible for 43% of all the goods imported into the United States. So you could imagine that this port right here in the City of Los Angeles is responsible for so many cars and toys and all these different goods that come into the US, and that all has its gateway through the port at the City of Los Angeles. These are just 3 of many things that we're responsible for at the City of LA. But I'm a Chief Information Officer. I don't maintain streets per se. I'm not a police officer. I don't run the physical infrastructure, but I do run the technological one. And I think what's really important to understand is that in addition to all of this physical infrastructure that I just described, is this massive virtual infrastructure. There is so much technology and communications and sensors just to make our city really function. So for example, we have over 22 smart city initiatives. And I know what you're thinking. When you think of smart city, there's just so much meaning to it. Sometimes it's just a marketing term. But really here at the City of LA, when we think of a smart city, we think of using technology, data, and resources to transform the lives of the people who live here, to transform and to improve the businesses that operate here and the visitors who come here. A couple of great examples of some of our smart city initiatives. One of them is around urban mobility. If you can imagine, we have over 4,500 connected intersections, which means that all these different traffic lights across all these intersections can be controlled through our ATSAC, our Automated Traffic Surveillance and Control Center run by our Department of Transportation. But it's more than just that. It's more than just the ability to allow traffic to move faster or slower depending on what's happening and to organically respond in the cityscape. We've also been getting into very innovative projects like pedestrian counting. Sometimes people think of LA as a car city, and that's really not the reputation we want to have. So we've been making tremendous efforts using artificial intelligence and machine learning to do pedestrian counts so that we could alter our cityscape, not just for cars to move quicker through the city, but also for pedestrians to have a much better experience. Or LAX reimagined. Many of us think of this airport that hasn't changed a lot since the 1984 Olympics, but we're in the midst of a $5 billion, yes, billion with a B, renovation that is completely transforming LAX in anticipation of the 2028 Olympics, which are going to be hosted in the city of Los Angeles. This includes brand new Wi-Fi. This includes fiber optics. This includes public safety. This includes all sorts of IoT and sensors to be able to get a lot more throughput of passengers through the airport, but also to have a lot less waiting, a lot less headache, and to reduce a lot of the traffic that people are accustomed to. But of course, these are all these great ambitions that we've been working on. And yet the year 2020, as you know and I know, has completely transformed what we do and how we do it. And so we have had to respond, like everybody, to COVID-19. And I think first and foremost is we had to tackle business continuity. At the city of LA, we had to move 18,000 employees really in a matter of days from working in a traditional office space to working from home through our teleworking platform. We had to not just provide them all the assets and the tools to be able to get the work done, we had to completely change business processes. We had to completely change workflows and authorizations. In addition, we had to do emergency services, such as rent support. We have provided over $103 million in rental assistance to Angelenos impacted economically by COVID-19. We had to have the systems and support and the call centers to be able to make that happen and roll it out very quickly. We didn't have months to prepare. We had to roll these things out in a matter of weeks. And of course, like many large cities, we had to provide supporting for tests and right now for the vaccination process. Los Angeles, I'm proud to say, under the leadership of Mayor Eric Garcetti, was the first big city to roll out a testing program. Within a matter of weeks, we were already starting to test Angelenos, especially in the high-risk areas, in the high-priority groups. We were able to start testing them at city facilities, be able to get them scheduled and tested for COVID-19. And right now, we've created these super vaccination centers using things like LA Dodger Stadium to make that happen, which is happening right now. So like many, we've had to be able to make that massive transition. But I think it's really important, and I love the theme of the Laserfiche conference this year, is really it's more than just about surviving, it's about thriving. And at the city of LA, we really want 2021 to be a year in which we thrive and not just survive. So to do that, that requires us to do things, I think, a lot more differently. So first and foremost, we've had to digitize a whole lot of services, probably like you, that were not digital pre-COVID. And when we think of it, we think of these digital services, or what we call contactless government, as really a digital key to the front door for the city of LA, to our city hall. And what does this involve? This involves a whole series of digital services that previously didn't exist. So for example, we are implementing something called the Angeleno account, which is a user ID across all city apps, and that you log in once and it's able to get you access into all these different accounts. We're also able to move all sorts of physical service desks and permit requests onto online platforms. But this also includes a great project being done by our Bureau of Sanitation with Laserfiche, and it's using Laserfiche's software to be able to take a whole bunch of physical documents and be able to move them into electronic workflow and approvals, everything ranging from bid requests all the way into things like overtime requests. And we're really proud of the work being done there. And so it's really an all-encompassing effort to convert something that was physical and analog and to move it into something that was digital. And we're using all the types of tools that Laserfiche, for example, offers to make that happen. And I'm sure a lot like you, we are the kinds of customers who are needing to take something that before we took advantage or took for granted, and now we need to go ahead and make this massive conversion process. And let's be honest, digital is so much better than analog. A good example are things like overtime requests. A physical overtime request that's signed by a supervisor, not only does it open us up for potential fraud and counterfeit, but it also means if someone wants to know where their request is, they could never check in on it. And with this overtime request process going in through our sanitation department, any employee could check and see where it stands to make sure that their overtime got the full approval. So digital, of course, is better. But it also includes other areas that we've been investing in. So for example, like 5G and IoT. I'm proud to say that the city of Los Angeles already has over 2,500 5G ultra high speed cellular access points in the city. And in the next 3 years, we're scheduled for another 3,000 more, which means that we are making this massive transition from smartphones, which before could get 20, 30, 40 megabits per second, to getting gigabit speeds. And it's not just for smartphones. It's for police officers, it's for firefighters, it's for any type of public safety or just even grounds crews who need to perform this work. This even includes 5G on sanitation trucks. I think it's interesting that you could put 300 trucks that each have cameras on them, but that these sanitation trucks drive the city streets every single week, and that by using machine learning combined with those cameras, we could identify someone who maybe jumped a couch on a sidewalk, or there's overgrown brush, or there's other kinds of things like graffiti. And by using machine learning, we can automatically create tickets into our 311 system to get the graffiti removed, to get the couch picked up, etc. And that's a huge transformation from where before we had to wait for the citizen to make the request to now we could be proactive. And all of this comes through things like Internet of Things and 5G. And it also includes, of course, the very important idea of digital equity. We live in a digital age. We live in a digital economy. And COVID-19 has certainly demonstrated through its mass move of students to online learning, but it also reflects the really important fact that not every community is as well equipped to take that on. I'm a chief information officer. My children have plenty of internet access, plenty of digital training, and plenty of tools at home. Not every LA community is like that. So as a part of that, we've been making very large investments. We created the Get Connected Los Angeles website that's already linked to by over 230 other websites. That's getting people low cost and no cost access to internet resources in their own community. We've also distributed over 3,000 computers and provide digital training to families in need. And 3,000 just a drop in the bucket, folks. So these are the types of efforts that we're making. And speaking of which, where did I get this Emmy from? I got this Emmy because at the City of Los Angeles, one of my many departments is our Channel 35 LA City View TV station. And I'm very proud to say that they won this Emmy for a documentary called Making Music, Making Friends. If you like to, feel free to check it on YouTube. But it talks about the importance of music in the life of young folks, which right now is being played virtually. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope this was interesting, and I hope you have a great rest of your Empower conference. So continue to thrive.
Thanks, Ted. We appreciate how you've been spearheading these 22 initiatives to build a smarter city for the 4 million residents of the City of Los Angeles, and sharing those lessons learned to an entire global audience today. And now, I'm delighted to have Nicol Turner Lee join us for the second half of the program. Nicol is a Senior Fellow of Governance Studies and the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation with the Brookings Institution, a nonprofit public policy organization based in Washington, D.C. So Nicol, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, Nicol.
Well, Thomas, first and foremost, thanks for inviting me. At the Brookings Institution, I'm a Senior Fellow in Governance Studies. For those who are interested, I'm not a technologist. I'm actually a PhD in sociology. In our role at Brookings, we focus on regulatory and legislative concerns of people, who have an interest in technology policy. If you're a person who is interested in how Congress is faring on these issues, we are the resource and the place to go. We have a newsletter that runs regularly with a variety of articles that touch upon online privacy to broadband infrastructure. And we have a podcast that actually allows us to break these issues down for the layperson. And so myself and co-host Darrell West, who is a VP at Brookings, but as well as a Senior Fellow in the Center for Technology Innovation, we spend a lot of time just talking about these concerns. And I know we're going to talk about it, but I just can't help but shamelessly plug the fact that I have a new book coming out on the U.S. digital divide. And so as I spend a lot of my time thinking about technology policy and telecommunications policy, and particularly how these issues undergird the concerns of people of color, older Americans, rural Americans, and people who we tend to think of as more vulnerable, that's the space in which I stay. And I think we have a lot of work to do going forward, especially as this pandemic has exacerbated just how increasingly reliant we all are on digital technology.
Nicol, that's a good point, and I look forward to hearing more about your book. Ted Ross earlier talked about our conference theme of not just surviving in this pandemic, but thriving. But he also brought up digital equity. And you've done a lot of research on the digital divide, and it seems like that the pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on communities of color and underserved communities. Can you tell us what your research has shown us?
Yeah, this is so interesting. And Thomas, you know this about me. Before I began, delving into the concerns specifically related to the pandemic, I spent about a year going across the country talking to people in a variety of cities. And one of the concerns that I had prior to the pandemic is the fact that the United States has about 18 million people and counting that are not connected to the internet. And we think about the way that the internet has transformed the way that we live, we learn, we earn, in some cases even love. We have to think about the extent to which the death of analog is going to have an impact on millions of people who are now dependent upon the internet for their groceries, to stay in touch with loved ones, to find ways to do what we're doing now for work in terms of remote workplaces, who are actually students trying to get online to stay in touch with their teachers. I mean, the internet has basically morphed into not just a necessity, that is a nice to have, but it's a universal necessity that you must have. And in some cases, it's probably a civil right as we see more and more services migrate online. I mean, the challenge that we're going to see in this pandemic is how do we leverage technology for both its good and its bad? Clearly, I think most of the people who are watching today know that there's a pernicious part of this, right? We saw that in misinformation and disinformation campaigns that led to the January 6th insurrection. But simultaneously, we know that there's a technology for good, and one that during this time of social distancing and the time where we've had to mitigate this unknown virus, that it's important to be connected. 2020 in particular was a year that being connected mattered. And I think that's one of the reasons why talking about the digital divide is so important. Let me just say one more thing on this. I mean, we used to think of the digital divide as binary, those who had access, those who did not, those who were connected to a device or had a device at home and those who did not. Now we're talking about an internet where you have to have a credit card to actually rent a car or transportation service or get a hotel. You need internet broadband, and you need actually a quality of service that's allowing you to do the things like get online and talk to your teacher or do research projects. So I think it's a much more complicated scenario that I look forward to talking more about my book with, but I think it's one that Ted really brings out. It's so important to be in a smarter city today than ever before.
Ted talked about moving the tens of thousands of LA City employees to virtual, and also about kids moving to online learning. You mentioned that as well. Joining us today globally, we have IT leaders from K-12 schools, community colleges, higher education. And what has your research shown us about the inequities of education that impact the occupational prospects of low-income communities of color?
It's so interesting. First and foremost, I want to say to all the educators that are actually part of the conference, you are heroes and sheroes. Because when schools went offline, we have to remember in the early part of March, 50 million K through 12 students, whether from public, charter, private schools, were sent home. Some school districts, because they actually figured out that a large proportion of their populations were not connected, decided just to cancel school for the entire year. New York and Los Angeles County were one of them. When we take into consideration out of the 50 million kids, and we start to break that down by K through 12 students, Thomas, we actually found out that 15 to 16 million K through 12 public school students did not have either home broadband access or an internet-enabled device. 9 million of those kids, according to research by the Boston Consulting Group, did have either. And when we break that down even further, we find out that the majority of those kids were kids that were Black or brown. There were families, 35% of families with multiple siblings in the house and one device. We also found out later, and we found this out through a podcast that I did with our Tech Tank podcast at Brookings, that Superintendent Alabama said that there were families that had to use the laptops of some of the students just to log on for remote work. When you think about the fact that this has been an 11, 12-month process, I don't know about other people. I mean, I have a 14-year-old that's sitting right now in front of her computer on what should have been a snow day, trying to figure out what to do next. When we think about those families that don't have the ability to hire tutors like myself, or don't have the ability to come off of a work Zoom call and walk in and check on your child, or understand technology the way that you and I both do, and all of the people that are watching, we are actually going to have learning losses. Let me throw this out there just for people to understand how grave this is. We're talking about the fact that, out of these young people that are not online, for African-American kids, they're going to be behind almost 7 months in learning as a result of not being formally connected to school. Latina kids, about 8 months, and low-income kids over a year. These are regressions in the type of progress we've made in education that I think really matter. And one of the things that I've been doing in my work is sort of saying to this new Secretary of Education, no child should be left offline. We used to have it where no child was left behind based on Title II funds. We need to ensure that no child is left offline, that every child comes to school with a backpack filled with a textbook and a tablet or some type of PC, that in addition to a pencil, there's a hotspot, portable hotspot for them to get access. And in cases where we can, we need to ensure that where kids live, housing developments, transitional housing shelters, all have access to some type of broadband. And let me say this last thing. Some folks out there, you read the story just like myself, and it was stuff that I actually found out in my book. Young people walking to local Taco Bells. Nothing to say about Taco Bell. I eat it. I love it. I will catch a Taco Bell in a heartbeat because they're 24 hours. But
I like it.
it's a right, I know, right? But it's a travesty when young 5 or 6-year-old kids are walking 3 or 4 blocks just to use their internet there or at the school library. So we have a big challenge to actually solve. And if we don't solve it, what I'm trying to suggest is that we're going to deepen the systemic inequalities, the educational disparities that already exist.
And Nicole, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Iowa. In some parts of the Midwest, you can't even walk into a Taco Bell to get Wi-Fi. They don't have it. So hopefully that will change. But I'm just thinking, you've got parents out there who are sitting in the living rooms working with their kids, and they're trying to decide who's going to use that laptop for remote learning or for remote work. I mean, Nicole, you've had a 20-year career. You're an accomplished author. You've testified for Congress. You've researched legislative policy. You mentioned you're not a technologist, but how do we get more of those kids sitting in those living rooms with their parents to think about STEM as a career? How do we get more kids inspired when they're dealing with this in their everyday circumstance to follow in your footsteps as well?
It's not easy. When I was growing up as an African-American girl, my mother didn't like math. She told me she didn't like math. As a result of that, my father, who was an architect engineer, he liked math, but none of his girls actually pursued a math-related career. It starts early. You have to tell, for example, African-American boys before they actually hit the 6th grade that there's a trajectory, a career in the math and sciences. Research tells us if they're not exposed to that early on, it becomes very difficult. If they don't major in that in freshman year of college, it's just not going to happen. You have to convince 14-year-old daughters like mine that it's okay to sit in a room with a class of robotics that may be mostly boys, because guess what? That's the industry of the future. Matter of fact, and I'll end it here, you got to tell these kids that are actually doing Zoom calls and using Blackboard and all these other really interesting, fascinating tools that the future of work is this. Sitting in remote environments, disaggregated from your workplace and your peers, but actually using new technology tools to actually govern people and manage people and create new products and ideas. To me, Thomas, this is the new future. And if we're going to get this right, I'm hoping that President Biden sees the importance of advancing computer science, but also making technology part of the grand scheme of economic recovery. We need a tech new deal, essentially, as I just wrote about this at Brookings, that recognizes the power of technology to not just be complementary to other functions, but be the driver.
So a tech new deal. So Nicole, we often use a different language when talking about racial inequality. For example, terms like health disparity in healthcare, achievement gaps for education, for historically underutilized businesses for economic development. From your perspective, what is that adverse impact of speaking in code, as we like to say?
Oh, I love that question. We speak in code oftentimes in technology. We speak in code explicitly when we use those terms. My old mentor in graduate school used to say we speak with the glass half empty versus half full. And we speak in codes, Thomas, when we talk about things like bias and the predatory and unintended consequences that come along with, algorithms that are unchecked for those types of disparities. At the end of the day, I kind of agree with most that we have to do something to unpack and unravel racial inequities. It's showing up every day in the type of polarization that is actually infecting the core of our democracy is just unacceptable and unforgiven. But at the same token, we have to lead with what the modern economy is. The modern economy years ago, decades ago with Roosevelt was agriculture. Today is technology. The fact that we could do what we're doing today actually speaks volumes to where we're going to actually find our profit margins. We need to shift the dialogue to allow people to understand that there's a Silicon Valley, but there's also a Silicon Alley. Places where people live, they can create. And that's the beauty of why I'm actually in technology myself. There's no limit to what you can actually do.
Or as we like to say in Long Beach, where Laserfiche is headquartered, Silicon Beach as well. So there's different perspectives there. So, Nicole, Ted mentioned earlier in the program that the city of Los Angeles has over 2,500 cellular access points in the city that is 5G. And over the coming few years, up until the 2028 Olympics, the city is scheduled to install 3,000 more to achieve gigabit speeds. How can the public sector partner with the private sector like this, like with major carriers, to provide no-cost and low-cost broadband access as well as other services to the underserved communities?
Well, I think it's such a great example because, China right now is sort of beating us when it comes to 5G access because of their ability to remove any type of regulatory restriction. I think we do need partnerships to move this forward. It's an all hands on deck strategy to accelerate 5G. And you know why I believe in this, Thomas? Because I think 5G is actually going to be the enterprise game changer. And so for the people that are listening, this is not about, how fast you could download a Netflix movie. This is actually, in terms of the 5G economy, how quickly you could do precision medicine, precision agriculture, how quickly you could deliver city service, how quickly you can connect people to the resources that they need to live healthier, wealthier lives. And so I think there has to be this type of partnership with the public sector. The public sector understands the needs of citizens. The private sector understands the needs of bits and bytes. If you combine those two worlds together, you actually create a perfect union that I think in the end will accelerate 5G deployment and ensure that it doesn't bypass those who are on the wrong side of digital opportunity.
I can't wait. We have a lot of technologists here on this program with us today globally, and we're all investing and invested in RPA, AI, and ML, and other technologies. But would you also talk about artificial intelligence and concerns around racial bias? And what should all of us as technologists be cognizant of to combat this particular issue?
Oh my goodness, Thomas, you keep giving these hard questions that require a whole new battle. let me just say quickly, here we are in the middle of trying to figure out a vaccination strategy. And here we are in a place where we've been sort of resigned to our homes, whether on the internet or through broadcast television, making purchases or assumptions or greeting people or really solidifying the profiles that we already have attached to ourselves. The question for the society and the question for developers is the extent to which we will make sure that these AI systems are going to be responsible, ethical, as well as inclusive. Yeah, fairness is a trade-off. I love blue dresses, and every time I buy one, the internet knows I get micro-targeted all the time for a blue dress. But it's not fair if the blue dress realizes that the woman within it is an African-American woman who, by the way, may be attached to a long-standing legacy of health and wealth inequities, where it may suggest that I don't have the money to buy the dress, or I may not be the right weight to fit the dress. Whatever the case may be, despite the internet knowing so much about me, it should not be used against me. And I think at the end of the day, we need to continue to force models that push that inclusivity, that challenge the values, norms, and assumptions of the people that develop the technology, while at the same time creating feedback loops from civil society organizations to tell us when we're right or wrong. Internet 2.0, I call it. And I actually don't call it 2.0 because it's like a next phase. It really should be exponentially 2.0. Because I think what we're actually seeing is this codification of new technologies in ways that layers itself to really surpass human cognition. While that will help us in climate change and surveillance in terms of bad actors, it will also not help us if we get ahead of ourselves and make sure it's not equitably available as well as fair in its design. Got a whole new work on that, Thomas. And direct people, I've been writing about that as well. If you look me up, you'll find it. But I appreciate you so much, Thomas, for having me on. You're just such a wonderful, what you all are doing at Laserfiche. I want to say to you, thank you, because these conversations are definitely necessary.
Thank you, Nicole, for being with us today. We really appreciate your thoughts and your insights and sort of your words on, no child gets left offline. I think that's such an important topic to carry forward after this conference. So with that, we really appreciate you being on with us today. Thank you also to Ted Ross, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.